Hello everyone. Well, my 10-year experiment in a dirt-planted goldfish tank has come to an end. It worked great for the first 7 or 8 years, but the dirt is mostly gone now. Algae has become a bit of a problem ever since I lost my Nite snail supplier, so it's time for a big change. There's a lot to do and talk about, so let's jump right in and get started. Step number 1 was deciding what kind of substrate to use this time around. I'll go over each of these substrates in more detail as I add them in. I decided to start off with a layer of Eco-Complete. This is a pretty popular substrate used by a lot of people. Then a layer of Fluval Stratum, another popular choice. Then it will have a layer of potting soil because I really do love using dirt. But this time I'll cap it with some HTH pool filter sand. Step number 2 was to move the current residents of my tank. These 4 ranchus were all born in my tanks around 5 years ago, and they had just finished making some new babies that are currently growing up in my sand tank. These ranchus look a lot bigger in their temporary 40-gallon home. I also moved over the 7 remaining Nite snails, which are all at least 3 years old and covered in Nite snail eggs. These snails tend to get very friendly with each other. So with all the ranchus and snails in the other tanks, I next took out all the driftwood with Anubias and Java fern and did a manual cleanup of the persistent algae I've had the last 2 years. I have recently discovered that the aquatic store Aquatic Arts is actually here in Indianapolis, so I'll have plenty of Nite snails coming soon. I wish I had discovered them 3 years ago. Next, I gave all the plants a spray of hydrogen peroxide and retied them to the driftwood pieces. These things have grown so much over the years that I want to try and use them all if possible. Now, the main reason I'm using dirt in the substrate is to grow 4 Amazon swords, my all-time favorite aquarium plant. Maybe I should have bought some new ones, but I've had these 4 plants for 10 years now, so I made the decision to clean them up and try to transplant them. We'll see how it goes. I'm also going to try planting 8 Hygrophila corymbosa that I had purchased from Dustin's fish tanks last month when I set up my sand tank for the growing ranchu babies. Now, I did a lot of research on what type of sand to use. I used these Supernaturals for the 40-gallon sand tank, but decided to use the HTH pool filter sand for the 125. And after making this decision, I saw a video by Alexander from Fishery in which he also recommends the HTH, so confidence is high it will be a good choice. I dumped 100 pounds of sand into 5 buckets, filled them with water, stirred them up, and drained off anything that didn't sink quickly. I did this 3 times until the water seemed pretty clear after stirring. Hopefully that's good enough. I have to say I found this step very fun to do. It was kind of like spending the day at the beach. Now came draining the tank. I was curious how much of the original dirt was actually left. In the first year having the dirt-planted tank, the goldfish pulled up all the stem plants except for the Amazon swords, so I lost a lot of dirt each time this happened. But I think the system of letting the mulm filter down into the dirt through the gravel worked very well for 7 or 8 years, which I suppose is pretty good for a dirted tank with heavy root feeders. The new plan is to make this tank an Island Aquarium. I'm only going to have stem plants in the middle 4 feet of the tank and only in the back 9 inches. So that's where all the layers of substrates are going to go. For the front and the sides, I'm just going to cover the existing gravel and dirt with sand. I figure if I ever decide to not have goldfish in this tank, that would still be good enough to grow lots of small stem plants everywhere. So I first took out about half the gravel in the island section and added it to the future sand section on the front and sides. During this time, I discovered that there were some detritus worms still living down in the remaining dirt. As far as I can figure, they've been there for 10 years, probably from the initial potting soil I used. So after seeing this, I decided to go ahead and leave a 1-inch layer of gravel and dirt, and whatever critters were living down in them. Live long, little worms, and prosper. So once the island section was clearly defined, I added a layer of Eco-Complete, which is a form of volcanic rock. Since the theme of this tank is an island aquarium, I guess it makes sense to have some nice volcanic rock for your base layer. Eco-Complete will, of course, also provide a long-term source of several different minerals. One 20-pound bag looked like enough for this 4-foot by 9-inch or so space. So at this point, I guess we technically have 2 layers of substrate, 1 more than I had planned, which would make Fluval Stratum our 3rd layer in this lasagna setup. Fluval Stratum is a form of clay that is supposed to have a lot of minerals and trace elements. The instructions actually say that this substrate is not intended for use with fish that would actively dig and move it about the aquarium, which is why this layer isn't going on top. I recall back when I did my initial setup 10 years ago that I considered putting some clay balls down into the dirt, since I know a lot of people find it's very beneficial to the long-term growth of their plants. Now at this point, someone might ask, is the only reason I'm using this particular brand of clay because it's collected from the mineral-rich foothills of Mount Aso volcano in Japan? Totemo hontou da. Personally, I think the ability to say that I have part of a Japanese volcano in my very own living room makes this product well worth the price. At this point, I build up a gravel wall around the island section, since I want to make sure that none of these sediments can leach too much into the gravel and sand section. Now the fun part for me, time to add the dirt. This really brought up a lot of fun memories from 10 years ago. I decided to use the same locally sourced potting soil that I had used in my sand tank. It actually contains worm castings made from red wigglers, the same kind that my wife and I grow in our compost pile. Since I already had 3 layers of substrate underneath, I decided to not go too overboard in how much dirt I added. I let it get wet and turn to mud and patted it all down to look like it would be about 1.5 inches of dirt once it was compacted down. Just look at that beautiful dirt. I wonder what kind of dormant eggs or tiny creatures it might contain. After that, it was time to very carefully cap the dirt with sand. I was aiming for about 1 inch over the old gravel and 1 inch over the dirt. I wanted the plants to be kept firmly in place by the sand, but still be able to reach down into the dirt from the start. Everything seemed to be going well so far. I had wondered if 2 50-pound bags of sand would be enough or not. I did check an online sand calculator, and it looks like it would be about perfect. For the final layer in this lasagna setup, I decided to put a layer of gravel on top of the sand of the island section. The gravel will hopefully act as a little barrier to keep the goldfish from digging down too far into the sand. At least that's the plan. Now the scary part for me. As some of you might know, my wife and I have had an organic garden for the last 10 years, so I have a lot of experience planting things, but I've never tried replanting something like an Amazon sword, so I'm really hoping I don't mess this up. I looked up online and found someone at the Aquarium Co-op forum say that you can replant Amazon swords and to leave about 3 inches of roots. So I tried to gently push these down through the sand just into the dirt layer. All 4 seem to work well enough, but we'll see how they do the next few months. What do you think? Did I do a good job? Now, while I was adding the sand layer, 2 things ended up happening. First, the local red shoulder hawk decided to get a drink from our bird bath, always an exciting thing to see from our kitchen window. We love seeing this hawk, but we also love seeing the bunnies in our yard, so we're a bit conflicted when he's so close checking out his hunting area. I think today he was just checking out the crazy amount of buckets I had on my deck. At the same time, my order from Aquarium Co-op arrived. Since I have sand now, I wanted a sponge pre-filter to cover the intake of my hang-on back filters, and for some reason they threw in a free sticker of a Ranchu goldfish. What were the odds? After the sand was added and landscaped around a bit, it was time for the final gravel for the island area. I wanted about 1 inch or so to keep the sand a bit protected from digging and provide more surface area for beneficial bacteria. Now it was time to add the water. The Amazon swords perked up and looked like they were doing okay so far. We'll see. This is the first time I've added so much water to a tank in a very long time. Kind of forgot how long it takes. It just goes on and on and on. Now at this point, I hadn't decided for sure where to put the hang-on back filters. I planted the 4 swords so they could be spaced evenly between them in the middle of the tank. So at first I added the driftwood with the Anubias in a pattern around the kind of bulky sponge pre-filter. I used to really not like the look of sponges, but now that I've had them for 5 years in my other tanks, they just look normal to me. Because I was unsure about where all the driftwood would end up, I put off planting the 8 hygrophillas until the next day. So on day 3, I made the decision to keep the hang-on backs on the sides of the aquarium. I figured it would be way easier to clean the pre-filter that way, and the driftwood and plants wouldn't be as crowded on the island. I also decided to plant the hygrophillias in front of and to the sides of the Amazon swords. 5 of these plants have been temporarily planted in my sand tank, and the other 3 had just been floating in my Anubias tank, where they had grown a nice root system. Well, by day 4, it became clear that all the leaves of the Anubiases were going to completely melt back. Apparently having all the algae scraped off, followed by a hit of hydrogen peroxide, was just too much. I put the rhizomins in my Anubias tank to see if they'd start making some new growth over time. The Amazon sword leaves also all melted back. I left the root bulbs in place, of course, but I was very concerned they weren't going to grow back. So I figured I would make sure that I have at least some Amazon swords in any case, and put it in order with Aquarium Co-op. They arrived the next day, thanks to their close-by store now down in Kentucky. After planting them, have you guessed it? Yes, the 10-year-old Amazons eventually started to make new leaves. Now, obviously I can't have 9 Amazon swords in a 4-foot space, can I? So what's going to happen now? Will I keep the old ones? Will I keep the new ones? Will I add shrimp to this tank? When will the goldfish be let loose to cause possible mayhem? These and other questions will all be answered in this Island Aquarium's first tank update video, coming at some point down the road. So that's the story of how I redid my 10-year-old dirt planted goldfish tank. I'm Andrew, thanks for watching, and as always, happy fish keeping.